There we go.
Marketing and promotion for, yes, there we go, for authors. So now we've started, and I'm out of sync, but it's no problem. Let's go around, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your books. We'll start with you, Jim.
Sure. I write under James McGowan. Jim's what I typically go by. I write epic fantasy, sci-fi, the Players of the Game series. This is right here, a copy of it. It looks like a mirror to me, but I think you guys have the, yeah. So this is what do you call it? A galley or whatever. And
that's a big book.
Yeah, it's about 300 pages.
It's a big book.
Yep. So it's the basic premise, or the quick elevator pitches. It's Final Fantasy by way of a death dealer for Zeta painting, and it involves a group of people. Starts off with the main character who ends up going by the name Repenter, who has a manipulator that deals with embroiling him and other people in the story in what he calls a game that is basically him manipulating history throughout the ages. And it makes use of, he's a pyromancer, and he has a lot of power, but he also has a daughter that he didn't know that existed, that ends up going out to find him to help with a particular agenda that she has with freeing a goddess of hers. And then it goes from there with the story, and then expands well beyond those two into like kind of a bigger Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time type of epic there. So that is
right. We got a lot to talk about with you then, Jim. Toi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Toi Thomas, and I am actually mostly I write and illustrate children's books, but I started out, I wrote a paranormal series that I'm currently revamping, and I wrote this collection of short stories, which is science fiction, fantasy, paranormal. The project that I'm currently working on is a collection of just fantasy stories, and I'm also working on an epic fantasy novel. So that's like, this is my introduction into fantasy, so to speak.
Awesome. And Daryl, let's hear all about you.
I'm Daryl J Ball, same name as I publish under. All I do is insert the initial. I write fantasy. Sometimes it could be considered epic, sometimes it could not. But in this case, I'll talk about my series, which starts with this book here, The Son of No One. And it's about a half-elf who was basically, half-elves were supposed to be killed as soon as they're born. His family managed to keep him alive until he was considered of age. And at that point, he went on a quest into the world to try and track down his human father, who is responsible for him existing. So therefore, he blames him for everything and basically wants to kill him. But along the way, he also has to avoid, being caught for existing. And also, he learns a lot of facts and truths about his life that he did not know and has to do with elven history, dwarves, a lot of other things, all in his attempts to find his father, because there is a magical barrier separating the human civilization part of the world from everything else, because they tried to invade, so they kept him cut off, and so he's got to find a way across this barrier. And it runs into a lot of problems. He makes some friends, and he delves into sort of his identity and faith and his lack of it, and also realizing just how different he is from others and how much others accept him who aren't elves. And it gets very close to some people, and it's kind of a very eye-opening journey for him throughout the series.
Cool. Well, we're all epic fantasy authors. Toi is going into that now, so you wait until your imagination starts. There is no limit when it comes to fantasy. Everything is believable, and that's what I love about the genre. But how many of you have been inspired by Mr. Token? I mean, was it his films, his books? Yes, I thought you'd put your hand up, Daryl, with your elves and your dwarfs and what have you.
Yeah.
What about you, Jim? Has he inspired you at all and helped you with your fantasy?
Oh yeah, the movies especially. I'm one of the people that I like the books, but I think the movies, for me personally,
Epic.
I like them a lot more. On top of that, that's kind of like the bedrock of other stuff. Like I played D&D in high school and college, so yeah, so there's plenty of that. And then comic books, I like those too, and those have a lot of it too. So I mean, luckily my preferred fiction has become more mainstream, so you can fly your geek flag as much as you want. So.
Yeah. And Toi, what about you, honey?
Yeah, I think I agree with Jim on this one. For me, I remember reading the books when I was young. I didn't read Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, but the movies kind of just visualized, made it come to life in a different way. And while I don't write a lot about like elves and things like in the epic sense, like my collection, like each little story focuses on like a different type of character, so I have like characters that are like hobbits, in one story, and then I have characters that are kind of like elves in another story,
kind of like
things, So I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a lot to answer for, Tolkien. He definitely inspired me with Illusional Reality, which the first one was written after watching the first film, and the second one was written after watching The Two Towers. But it's not a trilogy like the films where I stopped at a duology. But I've even got the Elven Star in my jewelry case over there, and I ran the UK fan club for Lord of the Rings. So
nice.
Yeah, huge fan. What about you then, Daryl? Tell me all about it.
Oh, I read Tolkien as a kid. I started with The Hobbit, did that in one sitting. Not a good plan.
Mm-hmm.
Then I proceeded to do Lord of the Rings. This was around grade 5 or so, I think.
Wow.
Remember grade 5, grade 6 when I read Lord of the Rings, and then had the set of the books and sort of then put on the back burner and focused on sci-fi with what I read. And then when I was as an adult, I went back to reading fantasy. And then when it came time to write, I wrote, and all that fantasy stuff came back really quick. Those ideas and his use of themes throughout just came very naturally. I actually did not see all the movies until this past year. I was very much guided by the books. Like I'd seen hints of the movies, but never actually sat through them all.
I envy your first experience with that. Those were good.
I tried the books, and I'm sorry to say I couldn't. The songs and the poetry just didn't do it for me. I'm skipping through the pages trying to get back to the action and the dialogue. So the movies just blew me away. And like I said, when I got back from the cinema, that was it. Illusional Reality was in there. It stayed there until it came out on paper and then published. All right, let's get to the nitty gritty. Let's move away from Tolkien. We'll talk about the languages in a minute. Let's talk about magic. I'll go with you, Toi. In your ideas for I don't know if you're a plotter or a pantser, but
I'm very much a plotter.
All right, good. So in your plotting of your epic fantasy, do you have a magical system? Who uses it? How strong is it? Who holds the power, and what power is it?
So yes, I have a magic system, and actually, obviously I read the genre because I love it. But I noticed there were a lot of like epic fantasies kind of have like this central theme, of like good versus bad magic,
Mm-hmm.
And then in a lot of other like books that I read, there's like this theme where like there's always like some kind of like dark religious order that's doing like dark magic and things. So I wanted to create a magic system that kind of revolved around the religious aspect of it, but that's the good thing. Like, they're not the bad people. So basically, the system is a religion that has been suppressed, and the empire knows, that if as long as people don't find out about, how to, read this old language, this old religious language, or do these old things, they'll never have access to the power, and they can control the people. And so the main character in my story stumbles upon some tomes, starts reading, which she's not supposed to be doing anyway. And the woman. And so she begins to learn about this religion, of course, giving her power.
And she didn't know that reading that book that she was forbidden to read was going to give her that power.
No, she didn't know. I mean, she basically knew there was something special about her, and she wanted to read, and no one else was interested in reading. So she's like, well, I'm going to read anyway. And in doing so, she ended up getting this power because she discovered this religion and has been suppressed.
So I can only imagine how she had to, how she felt when it first started, and how she had to control it. I mean, did she have any help in controlling this power?
Yeah, well, it's funny that, so there's kind of two main characters. So the one who discovers, the suppressed religion kind of happens back in time, and that's in the more of a modern time, even though I'm talking about time, it's a mythical world, like a fictional world. But in the modern time, there's another woman who's learning about this woman. And so when the original woman just starts to discover powers, she tries to hide them because she realizes right away that, if people find out what she can do, it could be dangerous. Well, the woman in the modern times, because she's learning about this woman, she too is getting the powers, but she doesn't think to hide them, like doing stuff, and people are, what are you doing? And she's like, oh no, like she wasn't smart enough to figure out that she should hide it.
So there's two women in two different dimensions. Both have now got this power. Are they related? Are they blood related or in some way?
Well, they're not relatives, but so another aspect of this story is, like I mentioned before, the empire is the ones who's suppressing this religion. They are like one race or creed of people. And all the rest of the people, like, they've come to their world and taken over, and they suppressed the religion that was there when they got there. So both of these women are native to the world. And so that's their connection. They're not part of the people who came and took over. They're not part of the empire.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, Daryl, you've got elves in your book, so I can guarantee there's magic of some sort.
Oh, this is going to get complicated. I'll try and keep it easy.
Oh, all yes, right. Please.
So, in my world, the magic comes from the energy around us in every living thing. When the humans tried their failed invasion and got turned back, in order to keep them from ever getting across, they had to account for magic users as well. So the barrier that was built is both physical and constantly empowered by magic to work as a barrier. What that does is what that's doing is pulling from any energy nearby, which has meant there's a sharp decrease in what's available for other magic users in the world. So it's become less used. But in general, people are of different races can be born with an affinity for using magic and then have to study it. But the ones who are most adept tend to be elves. There are other races that can, but the elves are the main ones. And they tend to study exclusively in it, and it takes them a long time. Some are born with a lot more affinity, learn very quickly. One of the secondary character, I wouldn't say secondary, she's almost like a secondary main character. She starts off the series as a young girl, and she was raised amongst priests, and then but also learned magic, and she has incredible affinity, and they have to keep an eye on her. Because one of the things that happens is the rules state if someone who can use magic stops caring about other things in the world and just basically focuses on the power, they sort of lose their morality and they're considered a threat to all living things, and they are to be killed if they're found. And so because this girl is so powerful, there is, I'm talking with my hands right here. I know you can't see it, but I am. But you have the constant worry because of her skill level and what she's going through on this adventure with the main character and others, is she's at high risk of becoming one of those people. So we're always trying to keep her grounded as well, because the potential is there. And so that comes up and is very focused on the first book. And then, but we also see her power grow throughout the series. The humans have magic, but they sort of look down on the use, and that gets covered later in the series as well as to why. And that was part of the reason for their invasion, is they're trying to sort of suppress it.
Yeah.
But
they're frightened.
there's a lot of complications.
Fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fear of the unknown, isn't it?
And it's very tied to the faith in each of the cities has, and just the elves are very much see themselves as the best of the races and are very strict about things in that way. And so one of the things that's discovered is that things aren't what they were taught. And so there's slow things coming up where stuff gets uncovered, and it ties to the use of magic. And it gets covered because you have to learn the individual spells and everything and incantations. And it's, like I said, pulls from everything, and you can literally, if you are really need the power, you can pull from your own life energy, which can have major consequences because it sort of ages you up to the point where you could die if you do too much.
Yeah, it's sucking it out of you, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's dangerous. Yeah, that's the magic system I have. I wanted it to be finite, to put some limitations on it, but I also wanted to be able to do epic things with it. So
I like magic that has limitations on it.
Yeah. I think you have to have limitations, because otherwise it just becomes a get out of jail free card.
Yeah.
So.
All right, Jim. What about you?
Mine's more kind of, I guess, treated as a separate branch of science in mine. Like I don't even call it magic in mine. I call it mancy, like pyromancer or whatever with that. So mine, it's actually like it's a fictional energy source. Like electromagnetism is the basis of most energy in science, whereas this one's called etheria, and it's tapped the same way. So it's actually looked at a lot more clinically in my stuff, where it's not really treated as something that's like unknowable or like extra mystical. It's just another means of doing something that electromagnetism can't do. And they use electromagnetism, like they have other people that are mechmancers, which is what basically technology magic hybrid type of stuff. So there's a lot of like we'll have guns and Iron Man style suits, but you also have guys on the cover there's someone wielding a giant battle axe that's magically charged as well. So it's kind of what they call a kitchen sink approach to. I was
going to say, you've got a bit of everything in your novel.
Yeah. I am all about the come one, come all for the type of genre fiction that I like to write. So.
Well, we have to have a conflict in our books to move the story forward. We need conflict to get the pages turning, to make sure that our readers are sticking with our books. And in epic fantasy, there are plenty of conflicts and they overlap each other. But I want you to dig deep and just give me one of your main conflicts from your book. Just one. Shall we start with you, Jim?
Sure. I'll go with the first book. The main conflict. I mean, you can talk about like the macro thing with like what I was talking about earlier with like the giant manipulator. It's kind of doing like the big plot of the whole series. But when it comes down to it, it needs to be like something that's focused on a character or characters, depending on like how many you have there. With the first book, the main one is a guy who starts off as quite a jerk to start with, having to re-examine his life and get better because of the daughter that he just met, that he didn't know that he like even had, but then as you know, the book's plot goes, I'm not going to spoil anything, but as the book's plot goes through, both he and she have to kind of struggle to get to the point where they can both literally and figuratively kind of save each other from the darkness within and without in the series there. That's I think that's the most compelling thing to write and also to read, in my opinion.
Most definitely. Daryl, what, just one conflict?
Yep, I'll go with the sort of central idea of the first book for the conflict. Okay. As I mentioned, he was a half elf. He was raised amongst elves, even though they were supposed to kill him. But because he was still treated as second class, he was beneath everybody. Like, they would never take any real effort if he showed any struggle with anything. And so he knows his days are numbered. And so he sort of has that sort of approach to life. Like, he just wants to get his father killed, and that's it. Because then he'll let them kill him, because he'll accomplish the one thing he wants to do. But what he finds is, in the first book, because of what happens, he meets a lot of elves who look down on him still in his attempt to get across the barrier. But at the same time, there is one of those magic users who is out of control and is basically killing everybody left, right, and center, causing massive destruction. And he has to he's faced with that. The main character is kind of faced with that conflict of what's more important, his own quest or putting it aside to save the lives of people who don't give one iota about his well-being.
I have a feeling he'll do the second one.
You'd think.
I do, yeah.
you would think, like, they look down on him and they remind him constantly, but
he's such a good person inside. Like, he's got such a good heart.
He could very easily be killed in the process, and then he can't do his quest, but it's kind of like, where's his heart at in these things? And exactly. What kind of person is he at his heart, as core? So that's the main conflict there.
Awesome.
Just this, him versus how he sees himself and how everybody sees him, versus when you're up against a real threat, not something like him who's just viewed poorly.
Yeah. Toi?
So I guess in my story, the major conflict is how the two women in their different time periods address and deal with the suppression of their culture. Because the woman in the past, of course, once she realizes that her culture and religion has been suppressed, she goes out of her way to try to learn as much as she can and get as powerful as she can while keeping it a secret. Whereas the woman in the other time learns about the suppression of her culture and religion, and she trying not to learn, but she keeps learning stuff and she's not hiding it. And so they're both dealing with, epiphany in two different ways. And so that's like the major conflict. It's like having the wool kind of pulling over your eyes to find out that the world that you live in wasn't supposed to be that way. And so they're each having to deal with that.
I love that dual, same storyline with two different women and two different times. I love that idea. With mine, I mean, Toy's read my first book, but with mine, my character's conflict is in herself. She learns she has a second will and she has to control this second will, and it's a duology of her soul. And before it takes over her, she needs to understand it and what it is and who she really is to be able to control it. But conflict is really important to get those pages turning. But so is characters. We have to have a character, even in a fantasy, we have to have our readers relate to them. So if you could pick your favorite character, maybe the one you had the most fun writing, the one that you think your readers would enjoy the most, who would it be? Toi, we'll go with you first.
Okay. Well, from, I guess, what I'm working on right now, of the two women, the one in the past is Jenny, the one in the modern time is Trent. And I would say I had more fun writing Trent because she's kind of fumbling about, and when the woman in the past kind of has it together a little bit more, so it's easy to write that kind of character. But to write a character that is more realistic, like if you found out that your whole world was kind of a lie and that you could potentially have power, and you were trying to like, I feel like it was her. She's more, even though it's totally a fantasy story, she's more realistic. She's more relatable because she's fumbling about. So definitely
sounds so familiar. Saya was like, where am I? Take me back home. I don't belong here. How dare you do this to me? And she was a definite stubborn woman until she understood that those people were her people, that land was her land, and she had to step up and become who she was to help her kinsman.
You're absolutely right. That's what Trance is going through. So
yeah, exactly. This is making even a fantasy, but making a character relatable is really important for the reader to enjoy the book. What about you, Jim?
I think mine would be there's a supporting character in my books. Her name's Virani.
Virani. I like that.
Yeah, she's ends up being the love interest of the main character, Aish Stellfire, and she's a former queen who had abdicated her role and kind of went to become a hermit because she had she had fallen, and the armor she wears is cursed, and it made her do some bad stuff, and she was basically just kind of living as a recluse for a while until Aish had to go and seek her help. They happen to live in the same remote area of the world, and then they kind of as they get to know each other more, she kind of relates to like the pain that she'd had in her past, and sees a lot of that in Aish as well. And on top of other, there's a lot of other characters in the books, but she's a lot of fun to write. If you take a look at my virtual booth, there's actually I wrote a bonus content story for it's book 2.5. Just I put 0.5 on any bonus content ones, and she's on the cover of that, and she looks, the cover artist did a really good job with her. She's shaven bald with a headband on, and she has this dark red armor and a big sword. She's a really cool character, so she's fun to
sell
read.
your booth, why don't you? That's for anyone who's watching this now. This is virtual booths over on the litcon.org. You can go over to your oh, there we go.
Yep. So this is Virani on the cover here. It's the favor, and the artist did a really good job of kind of making her look badass. So,
okay, cool.
Yeah.
So anyone can go over to those virtual booths and have a look at. You'll find amazing books and some amazing authors over there that you've never heard of. So carrying on, Daryl.
All right. I'm trying to pick one. I try to make all the characters relatable to different people, just to cover all the bases. But if I was going to talk about one that I probably enjoy most, it's actually similar to Jim. It's a supporting character. Mm-hmm. And it's the main character is a half elf, but this character I want to talk about is his brother, who's a full-blooded elf. He also picked on him, but he's also the closest in age of his siblings, and he's there for his brother. Like, yeah, he is in the wrong, but he's still loves him. He still loves this half-brother of his. It's part human, and he has a promising military career, but he's willing to put that aside if necessary. And he's just very supportive, and he doesn't quite always understand why. Like, he doesn't quite understand that his culture is wrong for the way they press this guy, but he's trying, and he's trying to show that he does accept, and does it in a lot of different ways throughout the series. When he pops in, he's trying to work around what he was taught, like what he was taught versus what the reality is of knowing his brother. And so he comes, yeah, so he's trying to evolve and learn, and it doesn't always go well because he grew up with the guy, and so his half brother the half human, half elf, is very much remembers being picked on by him. And it's, yeah, but you did this. That's not okay. And so this elf is very much, I just thought that's the way it was. I didn't know we were, hurting you this way. We thought you were in on it and stuff. And just, so he's learning. And that's like almost all the characters in my series. They're all sort of learning as they go different things and growing. So yeah, he's the one just because I like the fact that the names rhyme. His name's Takari, to go back to the Ronnie thing. So
no, I like
so,
I love the names. That's like with fantasy. We make up all our names, we make up all our spells, all our creatures, and it's just amazing, the imagination. Talking of creatures, moving on. Monsters, creatures, dragons. What do we got? Toi, anything in yours?
Yeah, because my magic system is kind of based on this like suppressed religion. I have characters that the two main characters basically will be kind of like witches. They're going to be called mages. But like creatures, there are these other beings that once you tap into the religious system, you get to commune with them, and they're kind of like angels because they have wings and things like that. And sorry, frog in my throat. And then also there are going to be some creatures that you'll find out have been kind of extinct, killed off by the other people who came, that kind of represent like dragons. They're not dragons, but what most people think of as dragons.
I love it. Everything you've said so far, it's like they're not elves, but they're like elves, and they're not dragons, but they're sort of like dragons. I can't wait to see what these creatures and characters are really like. That's awesome.
Me too.
Jim?
I have all kinds of stuff. I've got dragons. I've got kind of these energy vampire things called Drakus that, they feed on people's life force or their strength. I've got
I could do a whole book on them.
Yeah, got a couple.
I like that.
Yeah, I got demons galore. Like the main story of the first two books takes place in a mirror image of another, a dark world that is a mirror image of another lighter world. And there's all kinds of, your demons that don't have skin, or animated skeletons, all kinds of stuff. So
go there.
Yep, I got that. And I've also got like some I do have some things that are also like elves. They're kind of cross between DC Amazons, like Wonder Woman and Lord of the Rings elves. They're called Shan-La, and they're all like magic-y or spatial manipulating powers, and psychic powers and whatnot. So
awesome.
Fun stuff.
Yeah. Daryl?
Oh, I don't consider any of them monsters. they're just all different degrees of civilization that other races don't understand. They all have their own systems. So you have goblins show up, you have kobolds, and you have trolls, but they all have their own politics and civilization. Some are just feared more by others. Probably the closest we have is something that gets referenced very fleetingly in a couple lines, which are harpies, because I never actually show them. And in this case, they are considered the pest of the world. And that's what the military for the elves mostly deals with, is taking care of them. If they run across them, is putting down attacks by them.
Harpies.
Yeah. They're very much the worst of the worst. But there are dragons. There's one that shows up especially in the first book and results in a weapon for the main character. I won't get into that too much, but the dragons are, I mentioned everybody having born with different affinities for magic in the races. Dragons are, because of their massive size, the only way they could function is if there's magic at work to help them fly and everything. And they are beings considered of pure magic, that they owe their very existence to it. So they are almost a magic source entirely unto themselves due to their size and everything. And so they're feared, but they're also respected. And You
That's
leave them
cool.
alone.
Yeah,
But-
don't go near a dragon.
But and like I said, it just depends on what way the race deals with another race as to how they view them. They don't
Yeah.
like goblins very much, but they are civilized to a degree. The ones who live in a city are. And so, and part of the reason I did that is because I didn't want to portray any one race as a monster, but there are the potential for individuals to become monsters, such as when the mages become too amoral, they become a threat. Just the way they treat each other, you can be dangerous and become a monster to your own people and how you treat others. So that was just my approach for it.
No, I like that. Yeah, I get that. I got 3 monsters in the quest. We got one's called the Griffiths, which live in Lake Weir, and they're like green slimy goblins with sharp talons, and their mouths go all the way around with massive sharp talon teeth, and they can rip you, drag you underneath. And then we have the Rants, which are half rats and half men and half rats, and they're the guards of Helcon City. And then we have the Bustak. Now the Bustak he's written right at the end of the book, but he's one of the most important characters in the whole of the duology. And he is a blob of flesh. And it's just a floating blob of flesh with one little eye in the middle. And he's got no mouth. He talks through the mind with telepathy.
Huh?
And he's disgusting, but he's one of the most important characters in the book. So everyone who's watching this now has to go and find out why. We're going to go back to Tolkien for a minute and just talk about languages, because he, of course, was smart enough and had the audacity to make up his own language, which I certainly didn't have the time or effort to do. What about, let's start with you, Jim. Languages in your book, did you make up your own? Did you, do you use just English? I mean.
Yeah, so I mean, most of it's English. I mean, like, or equivalent, and I'll say like they're speaking the whatever language of the region. Like some of the characters speak this language called Grellish, which is basic. They're from Grelland, so that's why they speak Grellish. But yeah, then there's like Westgian and Demonic and Rathun, and that's just stuff that I made the name, but then of course it'd be like like it's translated to whomever is understanding it, or someone hears someone say something they don't understand, and I mean I'll have words that are I make up all kinds of words, but it's just something. Honestly, my criteria is, does it sound cool? And if it passes that criteria, I'll use it. If not, I'll think of something else. Like, I try not to use too many apostrophes. Like a lot of fantasy sometimes goes a little bit overboard with that. I do have that, like the Sean Law characters, they have some apostrophes in like their like the magic or the psychic stuff that they use and whatnot. But yeah, it's just, does it sound cool? That's my criteria.
That's cool. Toi, you got different languages in your book?
I do. I didn't create a whole new language, but I do make references to the language, of course, that was suppressed. And I do come up with a couple words to kind of point that out, because the idea is that, the woman in the past, once she, finds these things, she has to pretty much teach herself how to read this different language, which unlocks everything. And Trent, in the modern time, same thing has happened to her. She studies, different languages, but all the languages that she studies come from this empire. And then when she discovers this new language, that's kind of the gateway into her learning about the religion and her culture that's been suppressed. And that's how she starts getting the power, is all through the language.
It sounds so much like Druids, where they suppressed the religion because of the magic that come with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Daryl?
Okay, I'm going to be the madman then.
So you've got Elvish in yours.
I do. So what I did is, the main character, because no one really tried with him, he basically used to question himself a lot as a youth, and just read. So he's very much a scholar that way. So he studied any language he could get a hold of. So as they encounter different races, he's either translating or they're using a common language. But there's occasionally words I had to come up with that don't have sort of an English equivalent. They're unique to the elves. And so those words are put in there. So I had to create a whole set of rules I used to come up with these words, which is also the rules I use to govern how I name them. So I have a few words that are very specific. And when I use them in the book, I put them in italics. There is a glossary coming.
Oh.
Yeah, for book 4, I decided, okay, I've got room to put a few extra pages. Go through the characters really quick and some of these words and give an actual definition more than the book gives. But also, again, rules for how all the characters are named. It's for the elves, but I also apply the rules to give the dwarves what the elven equivalent of their name is. And it was interesting working out the rules for that system. I remember doing that. I was thinking, oh, goodness. How did Tolkien do a whole system like this? I'm just sort of doing as I need individual words. Yeah. I don't know how he did it, but it's an interesting adventure.
He worked on that book for years, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
He made those languages like in the trenches of World War I. Like he was doing that to keep himself from going crazy. I
think I've got maybe 3 words that are consistently used, and that's it, other than the naming rules.
Yeah.
And I figure if I just keep using the words off enough throughout the series, people are like, okay, I know what he's talking about there. I know what it means now.
Yeah. I cheated. I would love to have done a full language, but I didn't have the audacity. But so I just used Old English. I changed a few words so you're using the same meaning, but it was the old way of saying it, or the odd way of saying it. So you could understand what was being said, but it was being said in a different way. Just made it a little bit different, and the reviewers liked it. So that was a good thing. Imagine reviews not liking that. What shall we talk about now? What about where your people live? Their accommodation. I mean, elves, of course, we know trees, and the dwarfs are underground. Well, Tolkien, that's what Tolkien does. Whatever you do, Daryl, I don't know. But let's start with you. Where do your people live?
The elves and the humans have their cities of different sizes and types of way they built them. I kept the elves and humans very similar, and I don't get into why exactly till later on, but there are reasons for that. The dwarves are mostly in their own cities as well, but they stay near mountains for mining purposes.
All right.
So they tend to be near the base of a mountain. The dark elves, who are related to elves and dwarves, they live in a cavern about halfway up a mountain usually, and they have a very good relationship with the dwarves, who help them get their source of light. And but they have their city types are based on what they can fit in the cavern, and everything's sort of pressed up against the sides and very stone-like.
When you just said that the dark elves are related between dwarfs and elves, I thought Legolas and Gimli got together.
Oh yes, very much so. Very much so. They're actually, the dark elves started off as a hybrid race between dwarves and elves mixing, and then shot off on their own and intermingling amongst themselves to become a no race. So yeah, they resemble elves physically a lot, but there's dwarf influence in there for some of the stuff, but they primarily look like just darker elves. But that was how I did that. The gnomes, they live underground. I think
gnomes live underground.
Yeah, but gnomes live underground. And the goblins, I've never really specified, but they're implied. The uncivilized ones are implied to live underground as well. And basically each race was sort of like based on what was necessary. Trolls, they live out in the swamplands away from everything else.
I was going to say swamp, yeah.
Yeah. It's very important where they are, and they're massive beings. And they sort of see themselves as protectors of anything else living in those swamps. So they have their own structure. As I said, each of the races has their own type of civilization, and
That's
what their
fabulous.
needs influence this type of residences they have.
Yeah, cool. Jim?
Yeah, mine are a little bit more kind of, it skews more sci-fi for my stuff. So it's got a lot of cities they pop up a bit more in the second book. So it's, something that has, flying vehicles and, paved and a grid and everything. So something a little bit more, something that someone on Earth would recognize as a city. There's also in the first book, the characters need to end up going to a pocket dimension called the Cosm, where it's kind of a little pin. It spirals up a giant hill, and it has various kind of type of, either magic type of brick and wood type of stuff, and then he ends up having to go to a manor that a sphinx lives at that is somewhat hostile to him at first, but is a somewhat sympathetic character. So there's, as far as like the races themselves, most of it is going to be very similar to, it's more sci-fi than fantasy on that with mine.
How many books are in your collection, Jim?
Thus far, I've gotten 2 released with 2 bonus books, and then I'm going to be releasing the 3rd and 4th soon with some bonus books with that. I'm planning on a 10-book series if I can pull it off.
I can imagine it with everything you're throwing in there. I can imagine the Chronicles being a long one.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
What about Toi? You think yours is going to be a 1 book, or is it going to be more than 1?
It's definitely going to be more than 1. I haven't decided if it's going to be a duology or a trilogy.
Until you've done it, yeah.
Yeah. And as far as where the characters live, so the Jenny in the past and Trent in the future, they both live in walled-in cities. The difference is when Jenny is discovering her magic, it's in a time where the whole world is kind of a desert except for the walled-in city. When you fast forward to Trent's time, these walled-in cities now have vegetation, and the reason why they have lush vegetation inside the cities is because of what happens in the past with Jenny, and you find that out. Because remember, the people who are in power, they live in castles, they're the empire. The world that they came from was a desert. They're the reason this world is a desert, and that's why they live in these walled cities.
That's cool.
Again, it's very, very cool the way you do that you connect the two. That's I'm really, really impressed with that. Where did you get the idea from for this book?
A bunch of places. It's funny. I think it was Jim who mentioned something about like the Amazons at one point. So when I originally came up with this idea that I would, have a magic system based on a suppressed religion, I knew that I wanted the main like character to be female, and I wanted her to be powerful in some kind of way. And I started thinking about Storm from the X-Men, and I was like, she's awesome up there. And so like I totally was thinking about her when I came up with Jenny. And then I'm not really sure how Trent came about, but she was totally my inspiration for Jenny. And
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Storm's cool.
Have you got a title for your book yet?
So it's still a work in progress, but this whole idea about they live in this desert world, but in the future when Trent comes around, there is vegetation. And so the title that I'm kind of working on for the first one is We Are Jarden. And Jarden is I think it's the Latin word for garden, because you'll find that once the magic and stuff come together, that's where all this vegetation is coming from. It's connected. And so you discover We Are Jarden, which is, I know that doesn't make sense to me say that, but you discover what that is in the first book.
That's a good name.
That's
I
like that.
A good name.
Yeah, it is. What's your collection called, Jim? Your books?
The collection of books is called Players of the Game, and like they have different titles for, like, the first one's Repenter, the second one's The Brigands, the third one's The New Players, and the fourth one's The Breakers, and then I will probably call the fifth one The Game War or something like that. So
you already got that. Are you a plotter?
What was that?
Are you a plotter? Do you know where you're going with your next?
Well, yeah, plotter. I do a little mix of it. Like, I do plotting for the big stuff, but if the characters want to do something else, then let them do that. Don't say, oh, it's not in the plot.
No, you don't. You don't. That's right. You listen to those voices in your head.
Yep, yes. Exactly.
Daryl, what's your chronicles called? What's your books called?
It's called The Barrier of McGowan. McGowan being the world it all takes place on. And the barrier, well, self-explanatory from earlier. It's set to run 7 books. Unless something happens in the next book to make me go longer. The 4th book is set to come out this spring.
Good luck.
Yeah, it's been delayed a few times because pandemic.
Yeah,
that happened.
But it's supposed to be 7 books, and The Barrier of McGowan, and just maybe I'll revisit the world when it's done someday. But I'll want to do something else when it's all done. Just take a quick break.
Yeah, we need to do that. But just quickly before we finish, I mean, the pandemic, especially if you're talking sci-fi and you're talking in the future, are you mentioning the worst thing to ever hit our world in your books? Is there any mention at all?
I mean, in terms of in the fantasy world?
Yeah, I mean, you're in the past and you're in the future. In
my book, it happens in a different world, so it doesn't happen on Earth. So it's not really mentioned.
Right.
But something like a pandemic, occurs obviously in the past to like destroy the world. So that concept is there.
Yeah. What about you, Jim? Because you're into sci-fi,
So, well, yeah, there's a couple of things. There's I wrote the first book long before COVID, but one of the primary things that they have to fight in the first book is a sentient virus called the apox. And
thank God you didn't call it a COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
That would have been scary, yeah.
Yeah, and it had destroyed like a bunch of interconnected worlds before. There was also another cataclysm called the eruption that caused a big problem on one of the other worlds. So I've got a bunch of disasters that have occurred throughout all of it, either be it disease or other types of calamity that has kind of written how the worlds interact with each other, the various dimensions.
I can't see it in you, but surprise me.
Okay. I think the real world influences us in many ways. It may not be a direct link, but it may be sort of referenced in some other way. Like you have wars that happen in the real world, and those specific wars may influence how you portray events in your books.
Mm.
So a lot of the invasion I reference in the series is tied to real world events, but just sort of subtly influencing it, and sort of how the different cultures are portrayed are subtly influenced by other things. Whether the pandemic itself gets referenced in some way as a connection, it probably won't. Not in this series.
Yeah.
But I do have a series that's slowly being worked on, very, very slowly, that takes place in our world. So it'll get referenced there for sure. It
would have to be mentioned there, yeah.
Yeah, it has to be.
It's been absolutely amazing chatting with you, learning about your books and meeting all 3 of you, because I've actually met you all 3 of you before, so it's good to get united again. Before we go, do you want to tell people where, even if you haven't got a book out yet for your epic tour, if you want to tell people where they can find all your other books and you on social media?
Oh yeah, totally. I don't have fantasy out yet, but I do have, like I said, all of my children's books, which I did write a children's book about the quarantine.
Huh?
So yeah, it's called Joe and Chip in Quarantine. And you can find me online at toythomas.com or just Toi Thomas on Facebook, Twitter, and everywhere else. That's where I am.
Awesome. Jim?
Yeah, I got my website, stelfire.com, STELFIRE.com. That's my main hub there. I'm also Facebook, James McGowan, author. You can find me there, or at Stelfire on Twitter, and I'm all about. And you can also sign up for my newsletter on my website by clicking on that. And I send out a newsletter or author group, I guess you're supposed to call it. I send that out usually monthly, give or take. So.
And your books are on Amazon, or they wide?
Yes, yeah. The books are on Amazon. They're through Kindle Unlimited or Kindle Direct as well. So if you have Kindle Direct, you can get those for, part of your subscription to that if you want to go that route. They're available in both molecule and electron form. So feel free to.
Molecule. It's getting all scientific now.
Hard, yes, paperback or Kindle version.
There we go. I can understand you now. Daryl?
Right now, the easiest way to find me and links to everything is to go to my author page on Facebook, which is author Daryl J Ball, all one word. And that's on Facebook, and it'll have in the About section links to everything, including a website I just don't want to spell all the letters for. My books are wide, and those links are the ones I provide.
Brilliant. So excellent. And myself, I don't use a pen name, so Karina Kantas. You can find me everywhere on social media, and my books, all 14 of them, are on Amazon and wide, and they're all different genres, so I don't just write fantasy. So thank you to my panel. Thank you to everyone who's watching now and later, and whenever you watch it on YouTube, we thank you. Pop over to the virtual booths, go and have a look and see what you can find, and go and pick up these amazing books from these three fantastic authors. Thank you so much for joining me, guys.
Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you for having us.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, I'm stopping recording now. I don't think anything needs editing except the beginning. So I'll get rid of all that and we'll go straight and jump into the questions and get it on YouTube, and then YouTube will then be on Facebook, and you'll have the link for YouTube so you can then share it and everything.
Great.
Okay. Sorry we couldn't go live. Hopefully next year we shall be more ready.
Yeah.
We're going to start a year in advance for LitCon next year.
Is this so? This is annual. It's not. The last one was in November. I was just curious. It's not like twice a year, or how?
No, what we did in November, it was a trial run.
Ah, got you. Okay.
We didn't even know if it was going to work. We just wanted to give it a go and see what would happen. And we were amazed at the response, and we knew that it would work for March. But there's been hiccups, as you do. As you do, but we will be ready for next year, and I hope I'll see you all soon, and go down to the lounge later and have a chat with Joe and Richie. They'll all be down there for God knows what time.
Is the lounge on Facebook Messenger, or is it on Zoom, or how do you get to it?
I think they're doing it on StreamYard, but if you contact one of them, they'll give you the link once it's open.
Okay, so just like email one of them on it, or
just message them, unless they put it
Facebook
on the
or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right.
All right. Bye. Take care. Good luck with your books.
Thanks a lot.